Welcome to this edition of HM Sofa Sessions, and it's a little bit different this month. We have a slightly different format because I'm delighted to introduce Laura McLellan live from our Leeds office. Now, Laura has a particular specialism in conducting workplace investigations for clients, and that is what I want to ask you about today. So, welcome, Laura.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
So, Laura, investigations, they're obviously something that we've been helping clients with for a long time, but now we are bringing a new focus to that service through our dedicated workplace investigations unit. So, can you tell us a little bit about the impetus behind that and maybe what you're seeing from clients in this respect?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we have been doing this for a number of years. We've always either advised clients to do their investigations, or sometimes we've conducted the investigations ourselves. What we're seeing is a real trend towards more and more instructions to actually conduct the investigations on behalf of companies. So them wanting it to go to third parties to be dealt with independently. And we'll have even seen that trend in the media. Some of the prolific cases that we've heard of, for example, sexual harassment cases, a lot of companies have sent them out to law firms to investigate. So we are seeing a trend towards more instructions, which made us think we needed to really think about what we were offering and how we can assist clients in this respect. But we also recognise that as a firm, we have a real wealth of experience in this area. So a number of the employment lawyers in the team have dealt with workplace investigations and some really quite significant complex matters. One of our team, one of our directors, was seconded for 6 months to the investigations team of a global media brand. So we've got this wealth of experience. We also, at our firm, we are kind of in the unique position where we also have our HR consultants partnerships, and we also partner with Intersol, which is a sort of national leading workplace investigations provider. So we can draw from 40 plus investigators to deal with any investigation. And it will depend on the individual circumstances as to who would be assigned and who would be relevant. But yeah, we're seeing a real trend towards more requirement for workplace investigations. We recognised we had the wealth of experience, and we wanted to just put that together into an offering that we can put out there. So that was the birth of the workplace investigations unit.
That's really, really helpful as an overview. Thank you. So most HR professionals, particularly more experienced, will have conducted investigations themselves. So could you tell us a little bit about when really an organisation should stop and think, actually, we shouldn't be doing this internally?
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons why an organisation would consider sending it out externally. And it could be as simple as they don't have the resource. So they don't have the time or resource. If it goes externally, you free up your HR resource if you have that. Obviously, there's plenty of companies that don't even, don't have an HR resource. So it might be that. It might be they don't have the time. It might be they don't have the skill. So, if there are particularly complex parts of any complaint or any disciplinary that's been investigated, so for example, a whistleblowing element, bullying, harassment, discrimination, those kind of things, they might think we need experts to do this. We don't want to be missing anything. So there's that. Or probably the most common reason is actually just whether or not they can genuinely, independently conduct that investigation. So can they look at, conduct an investigation with a completely objective and impartial approach to it, which of course a third party can, where they don't have any knowledge of the individuals involved.
Yeah, that's useful. And I think an example that we dealt with recently is where seniority is involved, and that can be difficult. So, where an allegation involves someone at a board or an exec level, or even someone in HR, finding someone then internally who's both sufficiently experienced and genuinely independent, it's just not easy to do, is it?
No, it isn't. And that's the question that the person being asked to deal with the investigation needs to ask themselves. Can they genuinely look at this impartially? And if there is that level of seniority, or as you say, someone in HR because they've got that particular expertise, how can you genuinely say you can look at it in that impartial way? If, for example, the allegations against the CEO, who in the business can investigate the CEO and not have a mind to the fact that person is ultimately their boss? So, those kind of circumstances, absolutely, we would recommend that it goes externally.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, you're leading on this. You've conducted lots of investigations. Can you tell us your sort of thoughts on what separates a really good workplace investigation from a poor one?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of elements to an investigation. So most people conducting an investigation, you would hope, will at least have knowledge of kind of ACAS guidance on it. So, and you'll have a policy, you'll have a grievance policy, you'll have a disciplinary policy, and that will give you some guidance around what an investigation should look like. But it's so much more than that. So it is, have you understood the allegations in the first place? Have you got the sufficient detail to understand the allegations being investigated? Have you then scoped out the investigation correctly? Have you identified the relevant witnesses and the relevant evidence? And if something new arises, you need to go and investigate that as well. Have you been able to maintain confidentiality? Have you handled matters in a sensitive way? Have you looked at things in an independent fashion? Good interview technique is relevant. So asking open questions, not leading questions, and asking questions that balance up, sort of an assumption of guilt and assumption of non-guilt. Not bringing into any investigation prior thoughts and feelings that you have about an individual. So all of those things, are relevant, and all of those things are areas where somebody can be tripped up, as well as pressure from one way or another to come to a certain outcome. And all those things can cause, a poor investigation.
Yeah, and just touching on that, I suppose that's where that word independence comes in, and that means something quite important here when we're talking about investigations, doesn't it? Because you are not being brought in ultimately to just give the employer the answer that it wants, are we?
No, and that in itself is a skill, I think, to conduct these investigations and maintain that independence. Because if a company's brought you in to deal with an investigation, they're paying your bills. So it is difficult to not have a mind to what outcome they want you to bring. And I've absolutely written reports knowing that the outcome I'm delivering is not the outcome that they want, that they are hoping for. And I've had processes where I've had the company calling me saying, "Oh, can we get an update on it?" And really, they want to know which way your mind is going. So it is a skill, but you have to maintain that independence, and you have to have a view to, is this going to stand up to tribunal scrutiny if you're in a worst case scenario, and you have to base your outcome and your findings on the investigation and the facts, and not any pressure that you've had either way. And that's why I think it is, in a lot of circumstances, helpful to send it out externally.
Yeah, and I think, as lawyers, we instinctively think of all these different outcomes and scenarios, and really there's real value to the company in doing it that way, because we are giving, I suppose, the employer a really robust factual basis for whatever happens next, and whatever goes down the line, as you say, potentially looking at a tribunal. That's really useful. Thank you. And I think the other thing we just kind of, I suppose, want to touch on is that there's a human element to lots of this as well, because for HR or the company, particularly very large companies, it's just an investigation, isn't it? It's another thing that needs to be done. But for the employee making an allegation, or for the person, another employee who's been accused of something, it can be an incredibly difficult experience to go through. So, how do you think that plays into the way the investigation itself is handled?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. And I think something that's missed, because you can have a policy that tells you, do X, Y, Z, and you can speak to lawyers and they can say, do X, Y, Z. But they can be very emotional, and that has to be handled really delicately. because the way that investigations are dealt with can be really damaging to employee relations. If somebody feels like they haven't been heard, or their concerns were dismissed, or that there was an assumption of guilt before a meeting took place, all of those kind of things can damage relationships, and can lead to people leaving, constructive dismissal claims, further grievances, etc. I've dealt with some really emotional investigations, and as you say, it can be emotional for the person making the complaint, but also for the people who the complaints are against. And I remember one really difficult interview where I was interviewing a senior executive, and there had been a series of bullying and harassment complaints made against him by a junior female employee, and he fairly robustly responded to each of the points. Obviously, I had to put everything to him, responded to all of them. And then towards the end, I raised the final point, the one he clearly was not expecting, which related to sexual harassment. So the rest of it was bullying and harassment, not in any respect relating to sex. Raised the sexual harassment one, and he absolutely fell apart. He crumbled. He just got so emotional and so upset. And we had to pause to allow him to kind of pull himself together to respond to that. So, that I wasn't expecting that based on the previous hour and a half of the interview and his robust responses to the other allegations. So you've got to react in the right way. And you've got to, as you said, Sam, always remember that, these are human beings at the end of the day, and this is pressure and it's emotional, and the way it's handled can be quite damaging.
Yeah, and I think as you say, that's even more relevant in certain investigations that deal with some of those more sensitive topics. That's really useful, Laura. Thank you. So let's, I suppose, make this practical and think about the unit that we've launched now. Let's say I'm a HR director. I arrive at work tomorrow and I've got a serious complaint that's just landed in my inbox. I pick up the phone to you. What happens next?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, if you were looking to instruct us, so you were looking to send this to us to deal with independently, we've put together a triage process. So the very initial conversation would be what are the allegations, and who's made them, about who. We would sort of scope out initially what the investigation might look like. So what types of allegations are they? How many people might need to be interviewed? What kind of evidence might need to be preserved or to be located? And then what we do is we have a triage process. So we then assign it to one of three categories. So the first category is a fairly basic category. It is a grievance or disciplinary investigation, no particularly complicating factors. Then we have category 2, that is where there are additional complicating factors. So, for example, discrimination allegations, whistleblowing allegations, something a bit more serious, or just a real number of allegations, or a bit of a hefty investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have our final category, and that's for really the most serious and complicated investigations. And we would say that is where there is something like an allegation of criminality, an allegation of a regulatory impractice, a health and safety issue, something like that, or it is particularly sensitive in nature. So, for example, a lot of sexual harassment complaints would fall into that category, or there are other kind of complicating factors such as reputational damage, or the fact the allegations are against very senior individuals, and that kind of investigation is likely to fall into category 3. Once we have identified which category, we are then able to consider who the investigator should be, or maybe even a team of investigators if it's particularly serious, and then the kind of fee arrangement that might be in place. So initially it's a scoping call, it then gets triaged. We can then look at putting in place the right team or individual to deal with the investigation. The investigation itself will then, it will include reviewing the evidence, collating evidence, interviewing the relevant people, and putting together an outcome report. And we will always give specific recommendations in our outcome report, which the company can then go on to use as they need to.
That's a really helpful overview. And I suppose I just want to pick up on one point that you mentioned, which is about determining the right investigator or investigation team, as you say, because that's a really important part of the unit, isn't it? Because not every investigation is going to need the same type of investigator, team, the same approach for every type of investigation.
Absolutely not, and that's the purpose of the triage, really. That we are not, if you're in category 1 and it's a fairly simple disciplinary investigation, it might be that you simply don't have the resource to deal with it, so you're sending it externally. You don't need a team of investigators. You might need 1 or 2 investigator. So that's the purpose of that. We can then look at the specific circumstances, who's the relevant person. And also just who might be most suited to it. So who's got experience of dealing with investigations of that particular type of complaint, or who will the individual respond to in the best way? There's all kinds of factors, and we have a really diverse group of people we can call on to make sure that we are assigning the right person to the right type of investigation.
That's really useful. And so one final question, these are always kind of short sessions, so we're not going into all the detail today, but one final question. Someone's watching this, they receive a serious grievance or a whistleblowing complaint tomorrow. What's the one thing you'd tell them to do before they start any investigations?
Oh, that's a good question. I think probably pause initially. There's always an emotional reaction to receiving a complaint. And maybe jumping straight to an assumption or a conclusion. So I think it's pause. Do you have the full set of allegations? Do you need more information? And then just think about the steps that will need to be taken. So do you have an appropriate person to deal with it? What kind of evidence might need to be preserved or collated? And just planning. I would say that's a really key part of an investigation, is formulating a plan.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to finish. And sometimes I guess the most important decision, as you say, it's not how you're going to investigate something. It's who's going to look at it and creating that plan in the first place to get it right and avoid trouble down the line. Laura, thank you very, very much for joining us live from Leeds in our new Leeds office. You can read Laura's extended article, which introduces our new workplace investigations unit, on the Horsfield Menzies website, where you'll also find lots of information about how we can support you with workplace investigations. As ever, thank you very much for watching our Sofa Sessions, where we try and make HR conversations more comfortable. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you're not already, please do subscribe to our HR Matters, our monthly inbox drop for everything you need to know about HR and the world of employment law. So Laura, I'll just take this another say thank you very much, and we shall see you all soon.